Thank you so much for being here. I'll start with some opening comments, and then I'll answer your questions. Today, we'll be debating our Opposition Day motion. And our motion today, our plan today is to speak to people who right now are having an incredibly difficult time with the cost of living. We've seen the cost of living continue to rise on top of the already high pressures of the pandemic, a global war, and we're seeing the cost of living increase to the point that families are really struggling. And I had an opportunity to speak to a lot of these families over the break week, over the constituency week. Spoke with families that are struggling with the cost of gas going up because they work in retail and in delivery, and it costs them more to literally work. Spoke with families that are worried about what they purchase in the grocery store. And one of the stories I heard was a family that has to put down groceries. Going through the aisle, they had to put down things they would normally purchase for their kids, for their family, because they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford it in their budget because the cost of living is going up. And when we look at the cost of living going up, we know that there are some people that benefit from that. There are companies, there are large corporations that are going to profit off the cost of living going up. And there are people that are hurt by it. Families are hurt by it. Working people are hurt by it. And so what we're proposing in our plan is that shouldn't it be that those that are exploiting people, that are making excess profits off of this difficult time, actually have to pay their fair share and have to contribute back towards making life more affordable for people? Shouldn't that be the role of government? I don't accept that government can't do anything in the face of companies that are exploiting people. In fact, that is the role of government. Companies will exploit people. Companies will, if allowed to, continue to raise the prices of goods and services. Governments have to provide some way to stand up for people. And so that's what our plan is about today. The Liberals have proposed in the past election campaign to put a surtax on the profits, on the excess profits of big banks and insurance companies. They saw that big banks, like we did, were making tremendous profits, and that in light of that, they should be contributing their fair share. We're saying implement that tax, as you had promised to do, and then expand that to include oil and gas companies and corporate grocery stores, big box stores that are making record profits off this difficult time. That's our plan, that let's tax these companies that are exploiting people and reinvest that into supporting people that need it most. And that's what we're hoping to do. Donc, ce qui se passe au Canada à ce moment, c'est un temps où on voit le coût de la vie augmente. Et c'est plus en plus difficile pour les familles de rejoindre les débuts. J'ai parlé avec les familles pendant la semaine passée. J'ai parlé avec les familles qui ont de la misère quand elles achètent les épiceries. Et elles doivent penser, est-ce qu'on peut aborder d'acheter cette nourriture ou non? C'est une décision difficile pour les familles. J'ai parlé avec une jeune famille, avec la mère. Elle a dit qu'elle doit arrêter d'acheter quelque chose, les choses que sa famille a besoin, parce qu'elle ne peut pas aborder le coût de la vie qui augmente, le coût des épiceries qui augmente. J'ai parlé avec les gens qui travaillent dans les domaines où ils doivent conduire pour leur travail. Et c'est de plus en plus difficile parce que le coût de l'essence augmente. Et on sait, dans ce temps où le coût de la vie augmente, ça aide les grandes entreprises et ça fait mal aux gens. Et on propose le fait que le rôle du gouvernement, c'est d'arrêter les entreprises qui exploitent les gens dans un temps difficile. C'est pourquoi notre plan, c'est de mettre une surtaxe sur les grandes entreprises, comme les entreprises pétrolières, les entreprises d'épiceries et les banques, mettre une surtaxe sur leurs profits excessifs et réinvestir cet argent pour aider les familles à rejoindre les deux bouts. On pense que c'est le rôle du gouvernement d'arrêter l'exploitation de ces entreprises et on n'accepte pas que le gouvernement ne peut rien faire. Donc ça, c'est notre plan. On va avoir un débat aujourd'hui sur notre plan et on encourage tous les partis d'appuyer notre approche de dire que le gouvernement a un rôle à aider les familles dans ce temps difficile. Merci, thank you. I'm ready for any questions you might have.
So we'll start with the questions in the room. For the people on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. Nous allons commencer avec les questions dans la salle. Et pour les gens sur Zoom, s'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction lever la main. First microphone. Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Tom Perry, CBC. There's a work stoppage going on at CP Rail right now. I'd like to get your thoughts on the possibility of back-to-work legislation. Is that something that your party could support, or would you be against that?
We would be firmly against that. We believe that the right thing to do right now is to get back to the negotiating table. There is a strong, important role of workers being able to raise concerns and to be able to use their ability to strike as a way to raise concerns. And when back to work legislation is used so cavalier, we believe it should never be used. But when it's used in a cavalier way, what happens is then employers don't have any interest in negotiating with workers. It makes for worse work conditions, and it makes for an undermining of the workers' ability to negotiate fair wages and fair work conditions. So absolutely think that this is not at all appropriate to bring back to work legislation, and that instead there should be pressure applied on the employer to return to the negotiating table and to work out a deal with workers.
En français?
En français, non, on impose un projet de loi pour forcer les travailleurs et travailleuses de retourner au travail. On est contre cette approche parce qu'on pense que ça nuit aux efforts des travailleurs et travailleuses d'améliorer leurs conditions de travail et leur salaire. Et c'est un droit important pour les travailleurs d'avoir la capacité de négocier les bonnes conditions de travail et un bon salaire. Et quand le gouvernement menace de forcer les travailleurs de retourner au travail, ça blesse la capacité des travailleurs d'avoir l'opportunité d'avoir des négociations. Donc, on encourage l'employeur de retourner à la table, d'avoir une négociation et de négocier une résolution.
On a separate topic, the war in Ukraine has gotten NATO members talking about increasing defense spending. The head of NATO is saying that he'd like to see Canada and other countries increase their defense spending. What's the NDP's position on whether Canada should increase defense spending up to the 2% of GDP that's been called for?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that we are in a world now where people are certainly seeing that it is a scarier place and not the same place that it's been before. And so there's a certain, a real fear that we're in a scarier world. And I acknowledge that. And then the question is, what do we do in response to that? If we're talking about making sure the people that serve in our armed forces are able to do their jobs, are able to have the resources and equipment they need to do the jobs that we ask of them, absolutely, we believe that they should be resourced in a manner appropriate for the task that we ask them to do. But if we're talking about what we need to do to make the world a safer place, I believe there's many different approaches to that. And the role that Canada has played, and I think the role that Canada has been the most useful at playing, is a role where we're promoting peace, where we're promoting diplomacy, where we are doing our part to invest in international development to help countries get to a more stable and safer place, and our role in promoting humanitarian relief and support for countries that are struggling and for people that are struggling, and to do our part to offer that support here in Canada. That's the role that we've played historically that's been very effective and useful, and I believe that's a role that we should continue to play. And that's where I think we should put our resources.
So are you in favor of more defense spending?
I'm in favor of investing in the solutions to making our world a safer place that Canada has done in the past and can do most effectively. And that's humanitarian support, international development, and doing our part to invest in countries and people that need support and help. That's where I believe we've played the most effective role in the past and where we can in the future.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail. You mentioned in your opening comments concern about constituents and the price of groceries. You're proposing a tax on grocery companies, so it's not surprising that they would probably say that if faced with such a tax, they would pass on that cost to consumers. So wouldn't your proposal make things worse for the person in the grocery aisles?
What we're looking at is companies that in a difficult time are exploiting workers. And what we know is letting that continue to happen is without doing anything is just not acceptable. We just can't allow that to continue. So what can we do? What have we done in the past? we know that in the past, Canada, as well as other nations, put in profiteering taxes in difficult times when prices were being raised or people were being exploited. We decided that that was wrong, and we put in place profiteering to stop that. And I believe that is what we need to do. We need to acknowledge that there are companies making excessive profits, and we can make sure that they pay their fair share and reinvest that into helping people out. Without governments stepping in, companies will exploit people. The role of government is to say, no, that's not right. And to say, we can do something to help you out. People need help, and we are proposing a plan to do so. Without action, this is going to continue. And we know that the Conservatives have proposed things like lifting the GST. Well, what's to say that a company doesn't increase the cost of their goods to make up that difference as well? The only way we can really get at companies that are greedy, companies that are making excess profits, is to tax their excess profits and to reinvest that into people.
With the budget coming up, can you provide a sense of how your party is feeling in terms of, are you consulted on priorities? Because in the past, they've turned to your party for support. And specifically on this tax proposal that was in their platform that you mentioned, they haven't talked about it a whole lot. Are you concerned that they are no longer interested in the tax on banks and insurance companies?
Well, I am concerned that they're no longer interested in, and part of today's opposition motion is to put that on the table to say they should be implementing that tax on banks and financial institutions that have made significant profits. They should do that as they promised to do in the last campaign, and they should expand that to include big box stores and oil and gas companies. So that's why we're putting that in the motion. We think it's the right thing. Probably doesn't come as a surprise. We believe that in this difficult time, we have been calling for profiteering taxes on pandemic profits, and taxes on companies that are making record profits in this difficult time. So that's something we're calling for. As always, during budget time, we'll continue to put forward our priorities, and folks will know our priorities include making sure we invest in healthcare, something that we care deeply about. We believe in pharmacare. We believe in dental care. These are things that we've long campaigned for and are absolutely important to Canadians, particularly when the cost of living is going up. It would help people if we could cover the cost of the medication. And we're going to continue to fight for reconciliation, justice for Indigenous people, help in housing, help to make sure that we are tackling the climate crisis. So these are all things that we believe in and will continue to push for.
Next question.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. David Baxter from Global News. In the past, we've seen the NDP filibuster items like back-to-work legislation, looking back to the Canada Post legislation back in 2011. If similar legislation came up in this labor dispute between CP and the employer, would the NDP look at similar tactics?
You can count on us to oppose back-to-work legislation. Again, the fact that it's already being entertained and it's already being something that's being raised before workers have a chance to negotiate sends a message to employers that they don't have to negotiate, and that's wrong. We need to encourage employers to work with people, to work with those that are working at the company, to negotiate a deal. That is the way we get the best work conditions, the best culture, and it's best for everybody. And so we want to continue to advocate. The solution right now needs to be negotiation and absolutely not back to work, and we'll be opposed to it if that's what's proposed.
I'm just wondering if you could also help me square away, the motion, like the motion you're putting forward today is about lowering grocery prices, looking out for consumers and increasing prices. But at the same time, there is a very real worry that the CP labor stoppage could see a similar impact. It's the start of seeding season right now. Farmers need their fertilizer. The vast majority of that is shipped by rail. If there's delays there, that's going to drive up grain prices even higher than we're already seeing with the war, since about 25% of the world's grain comes from Russia and Ukraine. So just how do you square away the two sides opposing back-to-work legislation, where this could be argued this is one of those extraordinary circumstances where it would be necessary to avoid, undue increased financial stress on consumers?
Well, in one case, we've got the corporate greed of oil and gas and big box stores that are exploiting a situation and raising prices. On the other hand, we've got workers that are fighting for fair work conditions and wages. In that circumstance, it's pretty clear what side New Democrats are going to be on. We're going to be on the side of making sure workers get a fair deal, and that's negotiated. Nothing precludes the employer from sitting down, negotiating, and solving this right away. There's no intention on the side of the workers to say, we're not going to be reasonable, we're not going to settle for a good deal. They want to negotiate it. But we know that big box stores and corporate and oil and gas corporations are exploiting people right now, are raising prices right now, and they're being driven by greed. And that's wrong. And so we're going to continue to say that companies should not be making excess profits, should not be exploiting people. Pandemic profiteering is a real thing. We've seen companies make record profits in this pandemic that continue to pay virtually no tax in Canada. And so those web giants, as I'm speaking of. And so we need to make sure that companies are paying their fair share. And that's what our proposal is, that we don't accept that corporate greed is acceptable in a time like this. And we want to make sure that we invest that in helping people.
Next question.
Yeah, you said you favour negotiations and against back to work legislation, but could you say, in the case of a prolonged strike, how long it would be reasonable to wait? How long could these negotiations take place before you think some action should be taken?
Well, I would flip it and put the pressure back on employers. We know that the employer could solve this tomorrow if they were able to negotiate a deal with the workers. So I often feel like the pressure is placed on workers when it should be placed on the employer. Why isn't the employer negotiating the deal? Why are they being unreasonable and locking out workers? Why aren't they sitting down and negotiating a good deal? So I would say the employer in this circumstance has locked out workers. They are not negotiating at the table. They're the ones that are actually showing an unreasonable behavior. Workers are saying we're using our ability to negotiate a fair deal and fair wages and fair work conditions. What they should be doing, the employer should be meeting with them and negotiating. And I think that's where we should be putting the pressure, not on the workers that are demanding fairness.
You said you wanted to tax excess profits by oil and gas companies in particular. Could you just go into some detail about what you regard as an excess profit and whether there's a formula you would apply?
Yeah, what we're proposing in our opposition day motion and our plan is talks in profits above $1 billion, a 3% surtax. This is something that's proposed by the Liberals when it comes to banks. They proposed it for banks and for insurance companies. We're saying apply that same mechanism, that same tax mechanism that you've proposed in your own campaign, in the last election campaign. Apply that, as you promised to do, to banks, and then also apply it to oil and gas and big box stores that are making these record profits. And so that's the mechanism we're looking at. They've promised to do it, and expand it to those that are also exploiting people at this time.
And once again, if you have a question online, please use the raise hand function. Encore une fois, si vous avez une question en ligne, utilisez la fonction lever la main. Next question in the room.
So I just want to follow up on my question again about matching the consumer to your proposal, right? So the consumer that's struggling to buy groceries also buys gas from an oil company and pays bank fees from banks. So how does this excess profits tax that you're proposing help cost of living for the individual who's paying these fees?
Right now, without any action, nothing's going to happen. So the current status quo, there's going to be nothing. So prices are going up and there's no help for people. That's the current approach. We think that's wrong. And so our approach is, well, if these are the companies that we've identified as making significant profits, if we tax their excess profits, we can reinvest that back into people. How we reinvest that into people, there's lots of options. Direct financial support is something that we've done in the pandemic, something that we certainly can look at. Are there other programs that we can invest in that would lower the cost for families? One of the programs we've called for are things like covering people's costs of medication. That's a large budget for a lot of families. It costs a lot. We know we can invest in more housing. We know that housing and rents are going up in cost. We could invest in things like dental care, which a lot of families aren't able to afford now because of the cost of living going up, and they were just on the brink. They have to cut something, so they maybe cut taking their kids to the dentist. So when we invest that money back, we can give it to the families that need it most, and we can invest in things that people need to make life more affordable. And so that's what we're proposing. The status quo is to do nothing. We think that's wrong, and we're proposing something that will actually reinvest money into people who need it most.
And this concludes the press conference. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Merci.